Welcome to Campfire Conversations. I'm Jeremy Litchfield. Before microphones and media, we had fire. It was the first circle and the first stage. It was where people gathered to connect. This podcast returns to that circle. These aren't interviews. They're heart-centered conversations where love and fear both have space to show up. Campfire Conversations is part of my Heartstrong adventure, a journey exploring where love and fear show up in our world, especially in the lives of men, and how freeing men from fear can help heal individuals, communities, and systems. In this conversation, I'm sitting down with Kerem Durdag. Kerem came to the US from Pakistan at 18 with $200 in his pocket. He landed at a Catholic Benedictine university in Minnesota as a Muslim immigrant who had never even heard of the state before arriving there. What happened next shaped his entire trajectory. Monks offered him grace when the institution offered xenophobia. They gave him trust when he had no reason to expect it. And decades later, after experiencing racism and being told to go back home, Kerem has built a life rooted not in resentment, but in decency. Today, Kerem is a business leader and father. But what we talk about in this conversation goes beyond career or achievement. We talk about trust as a river of connectivity and choosing love when fear would be easier, and what it means to tend the fires of decency, empathy, and grace in a world that often works against them. We sat around a fire in Kerem's backyard and talked for nearly an hour and a half. What emerged is a conversation about what it takes to stay human. If this work resonates with you, I would love your support. The best way you can do that is to like, subscribe, and share this episode with someone who might need to hear it. These conversations matter, and your support helps them reach more people. Now, let's go to the fire. We'll jump in. Appreciate you willing to sit down and chat.
Thank you for having me.
And it's funny, when I got here, you said, thank you for being the second subscriber to my Substack. Just so you know, you're the second guinea pig of Campfire Conversations. So it's like, it's perfect. It's perfect.
Two and two?
Yeah. So I'll give you a little bit of context of why Campfires. And at any point, if you want to throw a stick on the fire, feel free. I think we got it pretty well loaded. I had this idea of doing these Campfire Conversations about a year and a half ago.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea was to just sit and have meaningful conversations around a fire, around things that matter. And I feel like people are willing to go places around a fire. It has this deepened sense of kind of connection and intimacy, and I can get into all these things around why fire does that for humans. But I thought that would be really cool, and to record the conversations, put them out there for people, and hopefully get people some good thoughts and advice from some people I really might admire.
Awesome.
So I really appreciate you taking the time to chat for about an hour or so.
I appreciate you being present. Very, very, very kind of you.
Well, thank you.
Very kind of you.
So because, despite the fact that we're talking about love and fear, I still have a fear that I'm going to not be able to facilitate the conversation since it's only my second one. So I do have my notes, despite the fact that I say it's a free-forming conversation, but this is just,
perfectly
it's
cool.
kind of like my safety blanket. I have it there and it's like, okay. But the intent is to let the conversation go where it wants to go.
Perfect.
It's not an interview. It's just, where we go with it. I do have some prompts I want to do and just kind of get you talking and sharing is really what I want to do, especially in the context of love and fear, specifically around men and masculinity. So I think what I'd love to do, and just for people, if anyone listens to this, who knows?
The universe at large?
Yes. For anyone who might listen, a little bit more context on you. And, here we are sitting around a fire in Maine. And I just love what do you think are some of the most important things that have happened to you in your life that's gotten you to this point? When you think about a little bit of your history and kind of some of those key things that brought you to Maine and then fundamentally around this campfire with me.
Wow. Okay. Some cool things that have happened to me on the journey. Well, I mean, so the biggest thing was that I actually came to this country on January 25th, 1988, when I was a little over 18 years old. I mean, that was a pretty big day. I mean, there was a whole life lived before then that allowed me to perhaps think I was worthy enough of that journey. But I came and for college. So I went to St. John's University in Minnesota, and that whole adventure is well captured actually in the TEDx talk I did, several years ago, many years ago. So I won't give away the TEDx talk, secrets,
And
but
I'll make sure I'll share that in the notes so people have access to that.
You can share it. But I mean, those 3.5 years at St. John's obviously were very formative, as most college experience ends up being for people. But perhaps for me, I mean, there was a sense of elemental effect, because here you have a Turkish Pakistani kid who is in Minnesota, never even having or heard of Minnesota prior, and at a very prestigious, well-established Catholic school. It's the largest Benedictine university in the United States. And so you have this Muslim kid in this very Catholic environment. And, you also have this is obviously in 88, there's a fair amount of, if we think that the immigrant experiences these days or in the recent past are indicative of how society should be knit together, and if it's not knit together, how it can be extremely deleterious to our functioning as a human species. It was the same in 1988. It was the same, 100 years ago, with all sorts of xenophobia and racism going on. But for me, it was interesting because in some ways I had some compass direction on that, because I grew up with Turkish parents in Pakistan. I was born and raised in Pakistan. So my comfort level in a multiplicity of cultures, I was immensely, and even to this day, I'm immensely comfortable in that. I usually said I come from I have two hearts, and then over the course of the last 35 or now close to 40 years, it's going to be 3 hearts. But when you are 18 and you think you can navigate, and when you cannot, it ends up being as like a step function change in one's soul. And I think that's what happened. I still feel that I actually wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the monks. I would not. I would not be here if it wasn't for the monks. The Benedictine tradition is deeply, deeply ingrained and etched in a molecular fashion into my DNA. I carry that with me every day. As much as I'm as a Muslim or a follower of the Sufi tradition, I have the Benedictine DNA in me. But yeah, the monks deeply affected my trajectory, in the sense that they supported me. They lent me a lot of kindness and grace, even though there were elements of the institution that were extremely xenophobic, extremely racist. But there was this enclave of also monks that pushed against that, and I nestled into that part of the community. I made some very, very deep friendships, which even to this day sustain and nourish me. So that's one big event, right?
So a question on there, because when I look at that and I see an 18-year-old Turkish, grew up in Pakistan.
I'm Turkish and Pakistani.
Yeah. Muslim, having the courage to come to a different country in a state that is not the whitest. You happen to land there now.
Close.
To a Christian school. That takes a lot of courage. That's like literally, it's like that's the exact opposite of your existence.
Yes.
And at 18, it's like you're like, you don't even know yourself. How do you have that courage to like do something like that?
I think that courage is a collective courage. There were millions prior and millions after, and I came with millions with me in terms of the numbers of people that were coming. I think courage at that time of my life, I'm not sure I would have been able to pinpoint that amorphousness. I I know what I had was this enormous desire to go somewhere which I thought was better. I had this enormous desire to go somewhere where I felt I could be actuated as a human being. You know, Pakistan, when I was growing up, to the day I left, it was under a dictatorship. It's a very different milieu. It's a very different existence. It's a very different way of relating to the world around you when you are living under a dictatorship. So there's always this constant denominator of wanting to push into a place where you feel you are going to be at an equivalent footing as a human being on all levels of society. Now, obviously, there are all these challenges, which, you know, that's not true, but at least you believe in that. You know, I was a kid that, you know, grew up on reading comic books, and even to this day, the concept, the character, the myth of Superman is very, very close to me. But I grew up on that. I grew up on reading Batman and, you know, the heroic activities of characters in a country which, to this day, I very deeply believe espouses as an ideal the best of what we can be and what we should be. You know, Turkey, even in Turkey, when I was growing up and visiting, you know, I went through 2 dictatorship experiences in Turkey. So the idea that I had courage, the courage I think was a shared courage, because I had friends doing the same thing. We had heard stories of people doing it. There was a certain trajectory to the idea of wanting to go. Now, my status as, or a station in life coming from middle class to lower middle class, was different than perhaps my friends. And so the courage may have been in, oh, I'm going to make a go of this initially. I think the courage then congealed into something becoming real, because you've got $200 in your pocket. Very soon after I arrived, the semester after, my family was in absolutely no position to support me, even to the extent that they were able to by a very small amount when I arrived. So you have someone that has to figure out, how do I make up, you know, being able to pay the tuition, the books, the shoes, the clothes. That's where the monks stepped in. I mean, the monks, you know, the monks have this way of wanting to equalize the wrongs that they see, or the injustices, or the inequalities that they actually saw in their eyes in me. And so they said, so you got $200. How are you going to go through 3.5 years of college on $200? And I said, I really don't know. And they said, well, you can work as many jobs as you want. And so I used to wake up at 4 o'clock and clean the toilets in the monastery and the university. After that, after class, I worked in the library. And the evenings I gave tuition lessons to people in the physics department. That as a freshman, you know. And I did that, and I never went home at all for 3.5 years. I worked through the summers, I worked through the holidays, I worked through Christmas, all with the intention that I need to be able to support myself. Now that takes care of one bucket of financial resources. The other is you're never able to make that up. So the monk said to me, well, this is the deal we're going to make with you. Nobody's going to know about this ever. But you will have an open tab. So books, whatever, you will charge it to your account. The deal is this: you will pay that back at some point in your life. That's the deal. So over the course of the 3.5 years, you know, I didn't abuse the privilege. I only had 1 pair of shoes. For my graduation, I wore the pants of Munawar Moin, my very dear friend from Bangladesh. I was wearing somebody else's shirt because I only had a handful of clothes. Graduated, I paid my very large bill off in about 5 to 7 years after I started working. But that was a deal they made. Yeah. Like, you know, handshake deal. I wouldn't be here if they didn't do that. I may be somewhere else floating around, who knows where, but I wouldn't be here. I certainly wouldn't have embarked upon the second big thing that affected my life, which is to go to graduate school. You know, I was at University of New Hampshire, and I met my wife. I met my wife in 1992. We got married in 1996. None of those things would have happened if I hadn't found this grounding, this elemental anchor spot of a bunch of monks saying, Kerem, you seem to have something in you that doesn't want to give up. Okay, so we'll stand by you. Okay, go. So that was meeting my wife is a massive, 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 massive happening in my life. From graduate school, together we created a life, and then we moved to Maine in 2000. But from graduate school, again, I wouldn't be here if a gentleman hadn't believed in me while I was in graduate school and gave me a job. So I worked during the days and I went to graduate school at nights. He gave me a job so that I could actually get on, after my work permit, get on an H-1B visa, 2 H-1B visas, and all that journey that goes through green card and naturalization and all that stuff. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Dan McCarthy. I wouldn't. Right? So my hope is that between the monks, Father Rene McGraw, who was the mentor. I've met many mentors. He's in the upper echelon of those. If it wasn't for Father Rene McGraw, Dan McCarthy saying, you seem to be nuts. You play great soccer from what I've heard. And yeah, we need an engineer to be able to work in this company that is very new. Go have a great day and don't screw things up. You're talking, that's an enormous amount of trust that's given. So my hope is that I've at least been able to at least live up in that day and then some to the trust that was placed in me at that time. Mm. So I'm not sure courage is a computing factor. You're just trying to get from point A to point B and have some intactness to your life. And I had that with my wife. I had that with my friends. I had that with all the sort of the cultural soul that you bring with the music and books and the poetry and the food. So you stay intact. You get seen on really good days. On really bad days, you don't. I mean, there would have been many, many things that could have derailed, displaced, deracinated, all that stuff. Somehow, I kept intact.
Yeah,
I did. But I don't think it was intentional. Then, I don't think so. I don't think so at all.
One thing you said there made me actually think about that entire journey. Towards the end, you talked about trust. Someone having the trust in me as a grad student. And there's a thread of trust in there. And trust is on my mind right now because I was writing about it today. Mm-hmm. Have you ever heard of a guy named Chris Lombard?
No, I have not.
Chris Lombard is a guy in Maine. He works with horses. Okay. For lack of a better term, he is a horse whisperer. Okay. What he can do with horses is amazing. And he talks about trust in the sense of the 1% to get you from 99 to 100 is probably more important than that 99. Mm. Because with 99%, there's still a little bit of hesitation. Right. And, as I think about this, it's like you had trust in yourself. You had the trust of the monks. And it was like, hey, no one's going to know about this. You got an open tab. You just got to pay it back. Right. They trusted that was going to happen. Yeah. Right. Yeah. There's this thread of trust, which I view trust as a kind of deep expression of love at the same time. Have you thought about that thread of trust that's kind of been throughout your life? Have you viewed it that way? It's just that was something that just popped out with me.
I find that interesting. I don't think I've looked at trust as much as I've looked at the constancy of love and grace. I mean, I suspect to some extent there's an overlap in there, but those beautiful human beings that helped, assisted, were present by my side, did it out of complete love. Yeah, they trusted me, but I must have been able to demonstrate something to them that allowed them to think he is trustworthy. And I know I didn't fail them. I think what you're raising is an interesting point, because the idea of trust, the root of trust is to be able to feel a sense of belonging, to be able to feel that you are seen, and that both, or society, community, is present. Because if you don't have those molecules, if you don't have those, so the atoms going around and trying to link up, the trust doesn't happen. So trust is not superimposed. Trust is a fountainhead that arises from this clearing, this understanding of knowing as human beings, what does it take for us to stay connected or get connected to each other. So the idea that trust is something transactionally obtained is, I vociferously would disagree with that. The trust is not a quanta of economic, social, or financial exchange. Trust is the river of connectivity, right? So because it's cross-cultural. I saw the Turkish Pakistani guy that's sort of floating around, and they're making the United States not just his home, but a spiritual place where you now belong. And by the way, I sidebar note, this idea of belonging is not a singular game. People can belong to various things, various cultures and geographical locations and communities. So when I say I belong to the United States, it's not at the expense of my belonging to Pakistan or Turkey. It's all together, which makes it an interesting little sort of the sea of possibility. But I think that's where the trust comes in. If one can navigate the limitations of our own humanness with some level of forgiveness, with some level of love, with some level of gratitude, I think trust sort of comes with it. And you have to earn it. It doesn't happen instantaneously, as it shouldn't. It can be lost very quickly, which I believe is as it should. So it's a constant nourishment, right? We tend to think in terms of, very small, non-glacial timeframes as human beings, a year or 2, 4 or 5. But if you think in terms of 10, 20, 30, 40 years, or life spans, or generational, now the idea of trust can really take root. I mean, there's a reason why the BIPOC community and the Black and Brown community feel aggrieved when it comes to issues of trust, or there's lack of trust, because there's been many generations where there has been an enormous amount of trauma. So, it takes a while, but if you do it right, it also lasts a long time. It lasts a long time. Sort of like, I don't know about you, but when you're hiking or running around in the woods, you're in the presence of stuff that's been around for a fair amount of time, especially in the whites. 15,000 years ago, the glacial melt ran through and deposited all this stuff. You're in the presence of stuff that's been around 15,000 years at a minimum. I don't know, that's perspective to me. It's like, okay, how do you remain connected? Again, this whole idea of trust, that you can put forward the gift that you're being given to in a way that honors the elders before you and honors the generation coming after you.
Yeah.
I'm a really very, very strong believer in that. And even in my business engagements, I want to, and I do, and I try to do the best I can, I think, in terms of the long term. How do you sustain things in the long term? Because I think that's how you live beyond yourself.
Yeah.
And that, again, but yeah, so I would love to read up on this Lombard guy.
No, I'll send you. He blows
great.
my mind. He's got a couple
awesome.
books. He's amazing. But the when you were talking about trust and belonging, it made me think of Beck and I. We go to a UU church in Brunswick.
Yeah.
It's an amazing community. Just this past Sunday, we were talking about our minister, who's unreal, was talking about belonging. And the idea that belonging essentially breeds responsibility. When you
Correct.
feel like
Yeah.
you belong, you are then responsible.
Sure.
And then responsibility breeds trust, which creates belonging, and it becomes this cycle that continually goes up.
Right.
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 And
Right.
you know, not to go down this tangent, because I want to shift gears a little bit, but when we talk about people not creating a lack of, not creating for belonging for people across the board. I mean, it's even when you're talking about even being in more progressive and liberal spaces, not creating a sense of belonging for people who have a little bit of more of a conservative viewpoint, right? Then there's no responsibility that is being taken. I think that's, you know, it's just made me think a lot recently.
No, I think that's true. I think the component of also belonging is vulnerability. The component of responsibility, at least within the communal level, is a social contract, right? So I to my core believe that we have a responsibility, say, to ourselves and to our community, and that's from the social contract. The social contract has eroded, granted, but it will be fine. We'll be able to repair, heal. But I think the important ingredient over there is the vulnerability that we need to have, the humility that we need to exercise, and a sense of deep stewardship and reflection on how we need to conduct our engagement with each other and to the world at large and to the environment at large.
Yeah.
I think those things are very, very, very crucial. So I imagine somewhere that we have these threads that we have connected to each other, and those threads need to have a level of nourishment that I think comes from conversations like this, comes from moments of deep silence and listening to some really cool music, or watching beautiful movies like Interstellar or The English Patient. We'll talk about those hopefully, but I think it comes from that sense of wanting to be. And the wanting to be is the beginning of belonging. You know, if you break that word, the etymology of it, you know, so you want to be and you want to long, and there's a longing to that. So in the Sufi tradition, you're always seeking. You're seeking for the beloved. You're seeking for the divine. You're doing it through memory, through sincerity, through remembrance, and also love, right? So when you want to belong, you want to be able to engage on that seeking without judgment, with all sorts of forgiveness for yourself and by others, and with no expectation, except for that you will be connected. And in that, I think there's some level of divinity, and there's some level of how should I say, song that happens if you're deeply try to be aware of it. And I think that in today's world, myself, I mean, you've tried to find those spaces, you struggle, which is why seeking is the intentionality behind that, I think, is important. You know, people talk about leadership and some very valuable zillions of PowerPoint presentations, of course. But at the end of the day, you want to be connected.
Yeah.
And you may not be 100% successful, that's okay. But if you want to be, and you engage on that seeking, I don't know, as Heidegger said, you know, in Being and Time, the Dasein finds this clearing. And when you get that clearing, if you're lucky, you'll melt into a puddle and you say, you know, thank you. I think.
So you mentioned something there. You mentioned love, which, you know, love and fear are big topics in my mind right now. And not this past weekend, but the weekend before, I was down in Virginia. And I went to an event called the Returning Citizens Luncheon, which is basically about 200 people, primarily Black men. Who,
I read about that on your post.
Yes.
Yeah, wonderful.
And what really struck me is, number one, the sense of love that's there, but also a lot of these men, they find Islam while they're in prison.
Interesting.
And they go in And trust me, I'm not saying in any way that the justice system is just. There's significant issues with our prison system. And despite what they went through, they found a way to come out and embrace love. And a lot of the men that I experienced did it through Islam. And I'd love to hear, because you have a unique perspective of having had some significant influence of some different religious traditions in terms of how you were raised, what you experienced with college. And I'd love to hear how you actually think and how it shaped how you actually think about love and fear. And from my own context, to understand where I'm starting to come from, I am now viewing fear as an alert system. It alerts us that something's wrong. It helps us survive. I view love as our connection and system for thriving. And that's kind of in simplest terms. And I feel like, and I've always been turned off by organized religion because I feel like it is inherently so fear-based. And I don't know a lot about religion because I just got turned off. So I would just love to hear a little bit more about your perspective on how you think about love and fear, and how you see it coming up in yourself and even others in the world, especially as a leader. You've led so many people at so many different organizations, even through the work you do outside of work, your, I should say, paid work. Would love to hear a little bit more of your perspective on that, especially specifically in context of men.
That's very cool. That's interesting. Let me think. I mean, that's interesting. I'm a little self-reflective here, but when I first met my wife, the way I introduced my soul to her was, I used to make, in those days, if you remember, you made mixtapes. So I made these mixtapes. Most of them from like U2 and Springsteen, and which she enjoyed. But one of the things I did was, the graduate school dorm at UNH, and she was hanging out and meeting with a bunch of people outside at the yard, which is outside the graduate school dorm. And I just took out the speakers from this crappy little Best Buy, sound system that I had, and I took the speakers out, and I just cranked out "With or Without You" by U2. And I sang the song to her, even though she didn't ask me to sing the song to her. But I thought, I feel deeply connected and passionately in love with you, so I'm just going to announce that to the world. Not really thinking the level of embarrassment I would introduce for her, because it's not like she had announced her love to me. But that experience, I think, was a indication of the idea and the importance of love, because after that, she came up to me and said, "That was very, very sweet, and I see you." I think that's really important. I think the intention of love is to be present. And you talk about how do I start thinking about love? My wife played, plays, and will always continue to be playing that very central role, because she's enormously centered in the idea of what the action of love can be, should be, would be. And part of it is my mother-in-law, an enormously grace-laden woman, enormously, and my mother, enormously filled with a sense of deep-rooted love for the idea of the purity of it, and that there are things that guide us because you want to be, and you need to be, and you have to be kind. And you have to have this level of grace and humility to walk on this earth of ours. I think as men, we're well advised to, if life has given us that blessing to look at the world of our mothers and mothers-in-laws and wives. And I'm not being facetious about this, because there is a sense of a historical spread of affection, of a feeling of rhythm with things around you that are pure. You get that when you don't have ego, when you don't have an agenda, when you don't have barriers. And I think about it, like for my wife, I mean, it's not that it wasn't the easiest thing for her to say, okay, I'm going to spend the rest of my life with this Turkish Pakistani dude. But there was love there, right? And vice versa. For my mother-in-law to say, you are my son-in-law. Or for my mother to say, hey, Mary, you are a daughter to me. Those are elemental things. We have that elemental love comes from to the kids. It comes from our sense of, how should I say, we believe that we can hopefully reciprocate the gift that was given to us by being a gift to others. And I mean that with all due humility and sincerity. Like, how can you be a gift to others? Well, by loving, by not getting caught in this enormously toxic male testosterone-driven toxic behavior of zero-sum games or power dynamics, or believing we have to, I hate these, this idea that our vocabulary can use vocabulary that's from warfare. We can crush it. We can kill it. We can stomp it out. We can dominate the market. We can climb that market mountain and completely crush. I mean, and that comes from actually fear, because we have convinced ourselves that we need to be able to function in ways and protect our ways by not being vulnerable enough, by not being honest enough, by not being transparent enough, by not being true to ourselves, by not espousing the ideals which actually further the human race from point A to point B. I mean, in the movie The English Patient, talking about love, right? It's a beautiful, beautiful novel by Michael Ondaatje that got made in this, in my opinion, the top 10 movies of the last at least 30, 35 years. The idea of love is also not just between two individuals. The idea of love is also historical, right? The idea of love is a multiplicity or multitudes. It's like Walt Whitman. I contain multiplicities. I contain multitudes of myself. It's the idea that if you read Sufi, somebody who lived 500 years ago wrote in Persian that got translated in English very poorly until very recently, and people still relate to it. There's a historical spread there of being able to understand what love is. And I think that's where we need to have a appreciation that the fear that we have is born out of trying to make things be simple. It is trying to distill things. But we're enormous believers in 6 bullet points and 10 words, and we're always trying to distill shit down to the simplest thing, because we believe that as human beings, it's too complicated, which is a bunch of horseshit. We can contain enormous amounts of complexity in our hearts and our brains and solve them. There's a reason why mathematicians, and I'm not a mathematician, fair amount of exposure as a physicist to mathematics, but there's a reason why the mathematicians want to get into the purity of solving a challenge. And that is, and the reason is because there's a ephemeral sense of beauty that comes from it. Ephemeral, but it's there, and then they seek it. It's no different than the cosmologist that's trying to understand the event horizon in the black hole. It's no different than the poet trying to figure out, did I just say something that hopefully can live 3 minutes beyond my ego? It is no different than the leader who's saying, you know what, I believe in that human being no matter what, and I'm just going to be present for them. It's no matter than the lawyer picking up and saying, I'm going to protect the rights of every given individual, no matter how hard it is, no matter how expensive it is. Right? So we station for ephemeral units, these threads, filaments of beauty. Fear is what we say when we don't understand that the seeking of beauty has no end. Because fear is, oh, I want it now. I have to define it. I have to live with it. I have to be able to click on it. I have to binge it. There's a finiteness to the fear, right? Because we can explain it very quickly, very simply. But when you're trying to get to that point of beauty, the creation of beauty, the understanding of beauty, however you may get to it, it could be you're standing on the ocean and you're looking at the infinite vastness of it and saying, holy God, this is amazing. Or when you're on top of a mountain and going, wow, I think I understand one very infinitesimally small sliver of at least my importance to the world around me. You know, that means that we have actually admitted to ourselves that there's more to things than what we think there is.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So you look around all this sort of milieu around us, and you're right. Fear is a fuel that has a certain lever to it. Growing up in a dictatorship, fear is used to control. Fear is used to, dominate one's thoughts to the point where you become nothing. Fear is reductive. It's a cudgel, a hammer, a laser beam that can reduce you to nothing. And human beings have used it very, very well. The death, destruction, chaos that humanity renders onto itself with that fear is very tangible. It provides results. Whereas love, you have to seek it.
Yeah.
You have to find the scale of it. But when you do, that's where you sort of push against the boundaries, right? You say, okay, no, I'm not going to accept that fear. I'm not going to accept the limitations that fear places on us. Whether it's fear, there's fear around us every day these days.
Yeah.
Every day.
You said some things in there that just made me think, a lot of richness in there. One is, you were talking about fear is essentially instant gratification is part of it. And part of that instant gratification made me think of answers, and that uncertainty is really scary, or not understanding something can be really scary.
Yes.
So let's take, for instance, if we talk about what's going on right now with immigration in the U.S., there's a lot of people, a lot of white men in rural areas who are suffering, and they don't know why they're suffering. And they're being told it's because immigrants are taking their jobs, and that Black people are getting handouts, right? It's a simple answer, and it makes sense, right? And as you were talking about that, I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then I started to think about how dealing with uncertainty, dealing with messiness is really hard if you don't have a deep sense of purpose, individual purpose, right? And so I was thinking about that, and how critical it is if you are going to be coming from a place of love. Purpose is so critical. And I've had some people tell me, in terms of what I'm working on right now, it's just, they've given me the advice of saying, I love your enthusiasm and I love your urgency. However, you can't control time.
Right.
And time will have me bound to, this needs to happen now. And when that happens, you start to lose sight of purpose. You start to be driven by fear, right? And so it just made me think of how intimately these things are all connected, and how they work together. And I've started to think about Love and fear is like a dance. They're dance partners. They're both important. Fear alerts me that my values are being somehow questioned or compromised.
Mm.
I need to pay attention and think.
Yeah, yeah.
Love gets me curious.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, I think you're saying some valuable things. I think it's an interesting place to explore deeply is the interplay of love and purpose. Because purpose sometimes implies this very traditional Eurocentric Cartesian view of being able to understand things and say, I have a purpose.
Yeah.
Whereas love, and I'm not saying doesn't have a place in today's life and today's world. It does. But I think we also need to be careful of how much we want to lean into and put purpose on an altar. I think it needs to be part and parcel, as you said, of the dance. I think that's a wonderful analogy. I wouldn't want to have purpose be the band. I think it should be the dance, and I think love can be the song, and love can be the dance partner. Because in my humble opinion, it's very like similar to, I don't know if you've been fortunate enough to go to a Nick Cave concert.
I have not.
You should. So you go to a Nick Cave concert, it's like, people, and I've been fortunate, you go to a Springsteen concert, people say it's like going to church. Like it's like going to church. Nick Cave is like going to communion. And you have to bear yourself to be able to go there with Nick Cave, right? Springsteen can bring the house down. He can make you understand certain things in life. Nick is not interested in making you understand. Nick is interested in making you see and arrive to a place where you are confronted with your humanity and love, right? So when you go to a Nick Cave concert, the expectation is that you are going to get washed over with every believable complexity that you may have thought you had or you thought you were capable of. And it's going to arrive at you like a typhoon. And it's going to rip your clothes off. You are going to get stuck to the wall. And Nick is the one through song who's going to be able to say to you, your soul is intact, your brain and your heart are still inside your rib cage, and you're going to be okay. That to me is that expression of love. And Nick talks about, he's got his book out and all that. He talks about the idea that love is the intentionality of engagement to fight, to really like go into battle with things that can erode our humanity. What fear, ignorance, isolationism, the thought that the I is more important than the we. Nick just takes that and just eviscerates the notion that you can't sustain and fight that with love. And it's a very loud, I mean, he comes from obviously a punk tradition, but now his music has evolved into something. It's sort of like going to a divine temple. But it comes at you with force. And I think that's the important thing. So when we talk about purpose implies some sort of tactical momentum. And love implies that it has a certain amount of cloud of envelopeness, of acceptance. But I also believe that love can be a hand that can push back with great intention and say, no, I'm not going to accept that because I love myself, I love you, and I want to exercise the act, the doing of love. My mother and mother-in-law and my wife, they're really, really, really good at that because they do it without, and both my mom and my mother-in-law, God bless them, passed away, but there was a sense of quietness, but also, I'm okay with leaning in here with with my love.
Mm.
And I don't think we should be afraid of that. But today's culture, to your point, we celebrate the idea that we can conquer things. The idea of conquering is huge in this country, huge in my culture of the United States. We like just conquering stuff. It comes from this, Puritan Calvinist traditions from way back. It comes from how this country was also, we have 250 years of blood in our hands with what we did, right?
That we don't like to acknowledge.
We don't like to acknowledge that. Look. On the other hand, I also struggle with that too. I went to a British school in Pakistan. The Brits colonialized all of the subcontinent. I wouldn't be here if I hadn't been lucky enough to have gotten selected out of some selection process when I was 3 years old, ended up going to a British school that actually had a pathway beyond matriculation and being able to find myself here, right?
Yeah.
I am a product of a colonial education.
Mm.
The best I can do, and I'm at peace with that, the best I can do is say, okay, I understand it, I have internalized it, and I'm going to do certain things to at least be able to say, if there's any other kind of colonial activity, colonial intention, colonial thought, no, I'm going to push against that now because I know how it works. Right? That's the least I can do to at least honor the heritage of my Pakistani culture that says, okay, you know what? No, we're going to sort of not accept that. We need to be comfortable with the idea that if we are to have a democracy, and the idea of democracy, as we all know, is it gets very messy, it's very complicated and nuanced, but that's what makes it work. And the fear is this corrosive worm that gets in there trying to simplify things. And it simplifies it by pitting people against each other, forming positions instead of conversations, forming these pockets of very entrenched and evil and toxic thought processes that their only agenda is to control and have power.
It's so interesting what you just said there, especially from your perspective of spending the first 18 years of your life under a dictatorship to coming to the US, which is supposed to be the model of democracy,
It still is to me, but yes.
And democracy is messy.
Very.
It's uncertainty.
Very.
It's uncertain. Like love is.
Right.
And a dictatorship, autocratic regimes are very structured. You know what they are.
Yes.
Kind of like fear.
Yes.
Fear is certain in many, many ways, or fear seeks certainty. And I started to think about how I can start to understand why fear leads people towards more autocratic forms of government.
Correct.
And governance.
Yeah.
Where love can lead people towards more democratic, even more socialist ways of being, because they're fucking messy. It's just that simple.
Yes.
People don't like messy. A lot of people don't because it's uncomfortable. Love is uncomfortable. Love can be very uncomfortable.
Yes, it can be very uncomfortable, and at least let me put some fire, get some flame going. But and I think part of that uncomfort or discomfort in today's world has come up from a deep sense, disappointment, aggrievement, disillusionment by a vast number of our beautiful populace in the United States that sees their earning power decrease, their communities get demographically thinner because of movements from rural areas to metro areas. They see others who are doing enormously well, controlling things, all the levers, and that they are not heard at all.
Mm-hmm.
that is a very, very, very big problem. Because if we have love for our fellow citizens, and if we have love for all participants of our society, it's not unlike what our great fearless leader Martin Luther King used to say. If you have those things, you admit your own failings and arrest the idea that you can't do anything about it, and they feel empowered to say, I am going to do something and equalize the situation.
Mm-hmm.
When you've got a middle class or a lower middle class that has problems getting health insurance or paying their mortgage or not being able to believe that there is some level of economic mobility, forget their kids, but just for themselves over the next 5, 10, 15 years. And when the data clearly suggests that the amount of oligarchic wealth that has entrenched and established itself disproportionately doesn't have the goodness, the intention of caring about 99.5% of the population, that creates this massive unequilibrium. And I'm not naive enough, or I'm not Pollyanna enough to say, okay, you know what, if we put out our freak flag of love, everything is going to be okay. But I am asserting the fact that if as a society we said, I love you and I understand what you are going through, so can we have a conversation in a space that's accepting of the fact I love you as a brother and sister, and I'm vulnerable enough to want to have that conversation with you. And it's entirely possible we may disagree on 99 things, but if we agree on one, that is where we can start to do something so that the level of agreement and disassociation and disillusionment at least sees a light. And I'm a big believer in this, in us being carriers of light. We have light here. And I'm not in the new age ecosystem to say, because that has a different meaning, a profound meaning in that ecosystem. When I say the light, I say it is with the sense of intellect, critical thinking, doing. It is with a sense of how do I solve things that are inclusive and not just for a select few. It is with, it's hard work, but I'm not going to give up. It is with a sense of collaboration. It is with a sense of public good and public benefit and public transparency. These are really fucking hard things to do. But I believe that when you come at it with a sense of, I have the light to be able to do that, I have the ability to love, even with all the messiness, at least you can say, when I die, I did honor the elders. I did the best I could. And I think that is where we are struggling today, is because the idea of honoring, the idea of, to your point, being responsible along the many dimensions is found to be unacceptable. We believe that in ideologies lies the refuge for our minds and hearts. It doesn't. It is actually lazy thinking. It's very lazy thinking. Being an ideologue is enormously easy and is lazy. But if you
don't have to make the decisions. The decisions are made for you.
You don't have to make the decisions. You have to made for you. You can read the spread of it. You can read Haruki Murakami. You can read Camus. You can read Neruda. You can read all these people, or you can read a very simple tract, 15 pages, 50 pages, that espouses a certain ideology. That's easy. Yeah, but reading Camus and reading Murakami and reading Neruda, not necessarily easy. There are places that I think we can look to. And one interesting, I don't know if you know, but the president of Uruguay, he was called Pepe, the president of Uruguay, who's passed away. I urge people to sort of listen to some of these YouTube interviews. He became the president after a long struggle, imprisoned for his beliefs. He was held in isolation for 12 years or 13 years. His whole life was devoted on anti-poverty. Like, I am going to try to make sure that the poor can live. Right? So when he became president, he still bummed around in his little Volkswagen Beetle, pale blue color. He did not live in the presidential palace. He had a very small shack with his wife. That's where he lived. He went and just talked with people, hung around with them. And he had some really acute observations, which is Uruguay, and he had the statistics, I forget, but Uruguay imports X million pairs of shoes. Why do we need that many shoes? Why do we not have just affordable housing? If we have that much intention and energy to import shoes, we should have enough intention and energy to provide basic housing to the homeless, to the poor. Why do we not just talk to each other? Why do we have all this pomp and circumstance in order to have meetings? Like, why don't we just chat? Right? Now, I'm sure there were people, and there still are people that sort of found this sort of buffoonish and cartoonish and very simplistic. But I think Pepe had some very, very keen revelations that occurred to him over his course of life, which are very elemental. And that is, in conversation lies the ability to discover, and in the ability to discover lies the kernel of multitude of revelations that allow one's life and the life of the community to get actualized. That's where that is.
Yeah, what you were just saying there, you were talking about discover, and you talked in the beginning about seeking, and it seems like in so many ways people have resorted to being zombies, of not thinking, of just literally they're just bodies in motion going through life. Right? And in some ways, I guess, that's easy. I mean,
it is.
I mean, it's not meaningful. It's easy, but it made me think, even like, as you were talking about, you can read this or you can read this. And it just then makes me think about the impact on AI and how that is going to take us, because AI it's not going away.
No.
And you can use it as a crutch to do all your thinking for you, or you can use it as a partner to expand your thinking. Right?
Right. Very true.
And one kind of, I would view it as coming from a place of fear, of just like, it's hard to do all that thinking. Let me just let this do the thinking for me. Right. But so, we've been sitting here in front of this fire. And the reason why I love the fire is because it's active, right? We're having this conversation, but we also have to tend the fire.
Right.
We're paying attention to it. Even we're on video right now, and as the fire goes down, people can't see us. We build it back up. People can see us again. It's kind of this. Yeah. It creates this amazing ebb and flow, and kind of the closing kind of conversation is really about tending fires, but not tending fires in the literal sense, but tending fires in the metaphorical. And so, based on what we've been talking about, what are the fires that you think we need to tend in ourselves as men and in other men out there to help us get to a better place? Because it doesn't matter who you talk to. Everyone is going to tell you shit's fucked up. It doesn't matter who you talk to.
Yeah.
Everyone's going to say that. And so I feel like there's a lot of fires that need to be tended out there, fires in ourselves and fires in other people's, fires in our communities. What are those fires we need to tend to help get us back in community, in a place where we can actually sit down and agree to disagree, but at least actually sit down and have conversations and not try and just convince someone that they're wrong.
I agree. Yeah, I love the analogy of tending to a fire. I mean, you see, the precedence of the conversation is to go deep. You're talking to somebody that was spit at for being a Muslim. You're talking at somebody that was slapped around and said you're a towel head. And all this in this country. You're talking to somebody that was called a Turkish dog. You're talking to somebody that on multiple occasions, with great vociferousness and intent, was told to go back home. The way, and I'm not alone in this, and there are millions and trillions of similar stories. So when you talk about the fire that we need to tend to, I do believe to my core that at least one of them needs to be a very, very, very deep sense of decency. The etchings that are on my ribs, bone marrow, through racist, xenophobic, extremely isolationist, nationalistic, and I would say lonely places that those came from. The only way those etchings in my bone marrow that I can say I'm now going to be okay and I'm going to sustain myself and nourish myself and be a participant in giving back and at least doing my part to have levels of equality in all aspects in our society is by being decent. I think we've lost a little bit of our compass direction in that. Decency is equated with weakness. Or decency is a beautiful flower that arises from the garden bed of love. And so is kindness, right? So, and these words, they're not just little, let's light little Hallmark gifts, birthday cards. These are really things that are my lodestars along this, this complicated journey. And, even if you read Clayton Christensen's, he was the dude that, sort of brought some rigor to the understanding of entrepreneurs and businesses and all that stuff. Even he came from a place of decency. If you're going to do a business, you got to be decent. You guys got to be decent. And so, if we can be decent and kind, what are the other fires that we need to make sure that keep on giving us the light? And I'll throw out at least where these days, at least my calibration is. I think we need to be extremely empathetic. We need to have this we need to have an urgent sense of empathy. We need to be passionate and have compassion. We need to have passion for the sense of belonging that we need to bring into our world, and we need to have the compassion to be able to put around all of those that are not part of it in the immediacy of these thoughts we bring. If we need to be immediate, you need to bring the people into the conversation. The idea that another concept, the fire, right? The idea of gratitude, where we assume things. Well, we shouldn't. We should be grateful. We need to have, I've used the word grace often because I really, truly believe in that. My tradition from the Muslim faith and the Sufi tradition and the Benedictine is deeply grounded in this idea of grace. I don't know if you know, but there's a Hawaiian tradition. So at one's deathbed, in order to connect, there's 4 things you can say, hopefully, if you're present, to be able to sort of come to terms with a very strong, sort of a strong leaning to it, but at least come to some plain field, some vista view, some savanna, some open prairie land of, acceptance. And that is, I love you, I forgive you, please forgive me, thank you. 4 things.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea or the words that, together with grace, that are constant in me is, you said the word courage. The courage to be able to live with the principle of giving a shit. I think that's the fire we need to tend to. It is the strength to stand in a place together with those you love, those you appreciate, those you respect, those you feel as a communion towards, just to have the strength to be rooted, right? We don't believe in rootedness because we believe in acquisition, we believe in conquering, dominance. It's awfully hard to be rooted that way. The idea, you talk about fires we need to tend. We need to tend the fire of creation, this little shards of sunlight that we call beauty. We need to be able to try to hang on to some filament of it and either create in beauty, participate in beauty, or appreciate beauty, whether it's through the arts, whether it's through a run through the woods, whether it's going with 80,000 people and screaming your head off for your favorite national soccer team, which I've been fortunate enough to do. I think those are the fires we need to tend to. The good news is, these are not externalized functions that we have to go on a massive, epic trans-Pacific journey in a shitty little boat, try to find and make sure we hang on to it. These are things we do every day. These are things that we live every day. These are things that are in our breath and our hearts every day. We just have made an elective decision to not do that.
Yeah.
It's an elective decision. Because as a society, we have said, you know what, that didn't get us anywhere. So we have to look at alternatives. So we have passed judgment on our ability to actually be good. That's the big fire. That's the big bonfire. What does it mean to be good?
Why do you think it's been such a struggle for so many men to go to the place of decency and empathy and awe and I mean that's the it's not even $1 million question anymore, because $1 million
$1 million doesn't go. I think there's obviously some cultural context to that. The experience of the male in Europe is different than the experience of the male in the United States, is different than the experience of the male in the Middle East, and so on and so forth. But I do think there's some common threads, which is, there has been a very misplaced sense of expectation. Let's call it on the male gender. And this expectation has driven a disassociation from reality. And so the way to try to overcome that gulf is through this very, very bromide effort to say, I have arrived, I am me, I am going to do certain things, and I am right? There's this insistence because the expectation has been either self-foisted or foisted by society. And in that expectation, society did a very, very miserable job of providing the space to talk about the challenges with that expectation.
Mm.
And so that expectation transmuted itself into this cancerous tumor of the nihilistic, and yet expectant power dynamic, power base. And it's interesting, if you look at it, these misplaced expectations have agglomerated into these different communities, different toxic communities. It's a heterogeneous, dysfunctional misplacements. It's not one thing. It's not it's not just one politics. It's not one social demographics. It's not one level of education, right? There's a reason why 17 million people tune into Joe Rogan, and from the ages of 18 to 26, 40% of them elected to vote in a way, in my humble opinion, is destructive to their futures.
Mm-hmm.
Forget about it. So I think it's that expectation. As a society in this country, we have lost, misplaced, or forgotten where the places are to have a conversation. Whether it's at the diners, at our churches, at our living rooms, at our ball games, at the bar, at the places where physical presence, that physical molecularity is, I would insist on it, that has shifted to a place where we are avatars, where we are in these spaces where our physical presence has been displaced by some digital ego. So when you do that, things get all screwed around, made even worse by orders of magnitude by the assholes, the oligarchs, who profit from that misexpectation.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a multiplier effect on that.
Mm-hmm.
This is not talking, whether it's the Cambridge Analytica bullshit that went on with Meta and all, this exists today, and we are all participants in that very maniacal multiplier effect of dysfunction. And so I believe the male, who has always, in this country tradition, in this country, in our beautiful country, in this country that's my third heart, right? In this country, the male is now uprooted, doesn't have the center, but finds some places to be able to go where there's some tentacle of a root that they can grab onto. And in those spaces, unfortunately, it's very toxic.
Yeah. Have you read anything from Robert Putnam? Do you know Robert Putnam?
I do know Robert Putnam. I haven't read him extensively, no, but I do know him.
He's got a couple of great books, Bowling Alone and The Upswing. There's a great documentary that's based on him on Netflix called Join or Die.
Oh, okay. I should watch that.
It's a great. He's. But as you were talking, it just made me think about his core thesis of how we have lost those spaces where people from different beliefs came together and talked and understand each other's humanity. And it's like, as you were talking, it made me think, like, first of all, number one, just continuing on with these conversations with so many different people from walks of life, I view is so critical. Like the concept of campfire conversations, you just sold it for me. Not that I wasn't sold on it, but to go out and since COVID, I mean, Friday night, Beck and I used to go out to the same bar every night just to have a drink, have some popcorn, play a game of pool. We just don't do that anymore. I think a lot of people don't. And not that these things weren't happening before COVID, but like those random places to
Yeah.
just go and strike up a conversation with someone, I think is
Yeah.
is so important, which can then start to lead to a lot of the other things that you're talking about, whether it's decency and empathy. It's like, when you sit next to someone at a bar, and you hear their story, it's really hard not to have empathy, and I don't care how hardened you are.
No, I agree. I think that as human beings, I think we are, whether you want to call it wired or we have a proclivity, or whether it's just because of who we are as a species, physical proximity is our essential oxygen to know where we are, who we are with, and who are we. I don't think there is a substitute for that. Now, and that's a result of an evolution that, is from 1.5 million to 2 million years.
Oh yeah.
Right.
We have mirror neurons that, like,
correct.
I have a hard time believing that comes through a Zoom screen.
Right. It does not. So if in 2 million years, if we had a campfire conversation in 2 million years, and we kept along this trajectory where we believe that a digital world, God, I hate the notion of it, but that the digital world is a place where we inhabit. It would be an interesting thought experiment to say, what would we be like in 2 million years of evolution in that direction? That's probably another campfire discussion. But what I'm suggesting is there are considerable power dynamics, considerable financial dynamics at play, which do not consider or admit that there needs to be a sense of responsibility if that trajectory is going to get established. So this whole idea of AI, at the current time, is an enormous shell game with a lot of money floating around here, there, and everywhere. But I think we should be astute enough to realize the history of humanity is full of power that's exercised through hubris, a fair smidgen of stupidity, and an enormous amount of ambition. So I don't think we're going to change that dynamic, but I do believe that there's a place for us actually using the tools of AI to be a community that has physical presence, to be able to push against certain negative, toxic things. That to me is a critical thing. Community. Digital communities, as much as they may exist or amplify our physical communities, it's the physical communities and the conversations, those physical spaces, that drive and will drive a firewall, because from those physical communities comes public benefit and public good. From those physical communities comes transparency. From those physical communities comes the belief that your vote matters and your voice matters, and that from a democratic point of view, you are not alone and you will never be alone. That, I think, is the possibility, because those physical communities can get encouraged, can get linked, can get amplified, can get actuated in reasonable ways by digital tools like AI. Whether it's the aggregation of data, whether it's the aggregation of information, that can be enormously empowering. The idea that AI can do chatbots and replace 50 million jobs, that's definitely a discussion. That's the easy part of the AI. That's already happening. That's already happening. The hard part is, how do you make AI work so that the physical layer and the digital layer are not at the expense of each other?
I think that's a beautiful spot to end on. Kerem, thank you so much. Thank you for your trust, for your time, and for your willingness to go deep around this fire with me. Your story, your decency, your commitment to seeking love, even when fear would be easier, it just really matters. It just reminds me why these conversations are so important and worth having.